I really hope I can do this story justice because it really deserves to be told properly, adequately. It's a good story about a miracle that happened just a couple days ago. And I think probably most people don't hear enough miracle stories, so here you go. About 5-6 months ago, a friend of mine asked if I wanted to go on a little getaway with her to their house in Florida. And I said, well, like to? Yes, hello, duh, of course. I would love to. I'm just not sure if it'll be feasible, but let me know. When you pick a date, let me know, and hopefully it'll work. So she picked a date in the end of September, and looking ahead at the calendar, I was available, and so I looked for flights, and I got a cheap flight, and it was a direct flight. It didn't even involve a plane change, which is kind of crazy lucky too. And so I booked the flight, and lo and behold, we got to September, and on a Wednesday, super early morning last week, we got on the plane of a Delta flight, and we left Minneapolis-St. Paul and flew to Fort Myers, Florida. And I was sitting in the middle seat of a 3-seat section. And it was super early in the morning when we left. And so I slept for the first hour, as did the man to my right and the woman to my left. And, you know, nowadays it's pretty rare to actually have any kind of interesting interaction on a flight. Everybody's got headphones on, and they sort of avoid interaction and contact and conversation. So we were all tired, we all slept. I woke up, I started reading my book, which was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And at a certain point, the lady to my left made some comment about the book, asked me if it was good, something like that. And I said yes. And then we ended up in an awesome conversation. And she heard me reference a whole bunch of interesting ideas about the wide variety of topics, which I'm familiar with and interested in. And not everybody's cool with that, but she was tracking, and very capable conversational partner, and it was a great chat. And her name was Michelle, but I didn't know that yet. And we talked for a while, and then I kind of tried to sort of check with the head office and mentioned then a resource to her because I felt like I got approval to proceed, and she heard me explain the one book that I wanted to recommend to her, and her immediate response was, "Oh, that's why I was sitting next to you today. My sister needs that." And so that was a beautiful, good moment, and already felt a little miraculous. I'm kind of used to things feeling a little miraculous. And then we hit a bit of a lull in the conversation, and I asked her what she did for a living, what she used to do for work. I wasn't really sure how old she is. And she said, "Oh, I used to be a flight attendant. And actually I worked for Northwest and have only been retired a couple of years, and stopped working in 2020. And at some point I had made a quick reference to the fact that I grew up in Korea. So she then mentioned, she said, you know, I've been to Korea, but I even did spend a couple of days. I had a long layover once my husband joined me. It was December. It felt super cold, but we enjoyed our time there. And that was cool. And then she sort of furrowed her brow and she said, you know, this is probably really unlikely, but I have a really good friend who was a flight attendant with me, and she was 8 months pregnant, and there was this couple, and I started smiling, and I interrupted her, and I said, "Joan Reamer." And she stopped and she looked at me, she said, "What?" And I said, "Joan and George Reamer, you're about to tell me about my parents." And she looked at me and continued the question, which was the story I already knew, which was a woman named Tony was working for Northwest as a flight attendant, and she was 8 months pregnant, and she went into labor early when she was in Seoul. And what Michelle knew was that Tony had been helped by this missionary couple who were my mom and dad, who are my mom and dad. And she said, once she could speak again after being completely astonished at this turn of events, she said, Kelly, she said, that baby would not have made it if it hadn't been for your parents. So here's a little bit more of the story in terms of the past part of the story. My parents lived for some of their time in Korea in Huamdong, right on the bottom of Namsan Mountain, very, very close to Namdaemun Market, and right across the street, probably about 200 yards across the street from the Hilton Hotel. And the people at the Hilton Hotel were very familiar with my parents for lots of reasons. And so when Tony went into labor and they knew they had a medical crisis happening with one of the Northwest employees in the middle of the night, the hotel called my parents. And my mom scrambled, got over there, helped. Tony was at the hospital. My folks were translating. My mom and dad helped facilitate all the communication with the U.S. Embassy and all the complexities involved when you have a preemie baby born in another country long before anybody expected, and you're figuring out how to handle passports and all of the paperwork. My mom says that the passport picture is actually this little teensy tiny baby named Lucy in the hand of my mother at the hospital where she was getting cared for. And of course the preemie Lucy and her mom, Tony, couldn't travel for quite some time. And so my folks were helping. And I think Tony's mom came to Korea, I think maybe stayed at my parents' house for 2 weeks. So there was this huge interaction, this great collaboration service by my parents with these people, with this family. And they remember that a couple months later, it was November, and my folks got another call from the Hilton, and they said, well, we have a package here for you. And my mom said, why do you have a package for us at the hotel? Like, this doesn't make any sense. And they said, well, it's okay. We have it in the refrigerator. And so my mom went across the street to the Hilton, and lo and behold, Northwest had bought and sent to them a big box filled with an entire turkey and all the trimmings for Thanksgiving dinner. And that was a gesture of thanks from the company to my parents for how they had helped. So back to 2023, an airplane flight from Minneapolis, St. Paul to Fort Myers, Florida. And it turns out Michelle, who's sitting next to me on this plane flight, is the best friend of Tony. And on her phone has a picture of Tony. And on her phone has a picture of Tony's baby, Lucy, getting married. And so I get a piece of paper out and quickly scribble down my parents' name and number, their phone number and their address. And I thought, well, maybe Tony can send them a little thank you note, just send them a little hello note. But Tony did way better than that. She called. So my mom got a surprise phone call about 2 days ago from Tony, who had gone into labor when she was 8 months pregnant and had a baby in Seoul unexpectedly and needed somebody to help. And my parents were the ones who did. And it is so awesome to live a life where crazy, preposterous, unlikely, impossible things happen all the time. This particular event, the logical response is to say, what are the odds? And the right answer to that question is always, it depends on how you calculate the odds. It depends on what and who you factor into the odds. Because miracles happen all the time if you're watching for them, if you let them happen, if you participate in the ways that they can happen. So, thanks to my friend Sherry for facilitating a miracle by inviting me on a little getaway trip to Florida at a time when the timing was perfect and I had just finished a big task and I really needed a little downtime and a chance to get away and enjoy water in salt form with sand nearby. And thanks to Michelle for being an awesome conversational partner and somebody who's curious about a book that somebody else is reading and who's capable of having a really vigorous, rich conversation, and who's capable of hearing the prompt to ask an unlikely question and then have all the benefit for herself and for a whole bunch of other people of the crazy impossible answer. And thanks to, the creator for making a world that can be so much more than rational sometimes. Stuff like this happens all the time to me, and I think it happens all the time to lots of other people. So I'm grateful for that, and I am glad to live in a universe where little ordinary random small miracles happen all the time. And thanks to Tony for calling my mom too, and maybe even for visiting in person soon, it sounds like, because that is a beautiful thing, and I am grateful for all of it.